Was that just a statement?
That was just a statement that I will probably cut out. My name is Brock, and this is the Dungeon Master's Toolkit Podcast. Welcome, everybody. I have a very special guest with me today. Today it is my wife, Ashley, being interviewed. Welcome, Ashley.
Oh my gosh, thank you. I don't know if I'd call me a special guest, but I guess we'll see.
And so the first question that we always start out with is, how did you get started in tabletop role-playing games?
Well, you. Basically, well, I mean, I guess when I was younger, I had heard about RPGs or, role-playing games. I didn't really have a whole lot of an interest in them until later. I was in speech in high school, and, I really enjoyed that. I have quite horrible hand-eye coordination when it comes to video games, but I do like, playing different games and stuff. And so after I learned more about RPGs, I realized that it kind of mixes two things that I really enjoy. And so you had brought it up to me a few different times. We had played, let's see, what was the first one that you did for
The Star
us?
Wars one.
Yeah. So we did that and actually really enjoyed it, although it was kind of difficult the first time, just kind of realizing, all that goes into it. But then, yeah, kind of found a love for it, I guess, as we, as you kind of went through the different,
I went off the deep end.
Yeah.
For RPGs.
Right. So you kind of took me along for the ride, but thank goodness it was an enjoyable one.
I don't think we've ever really brought up the fact that your time in speech would have crossed over with RPGs. At least I hadn't thought of that. I was never in speech, so I didn't have that aspect of storytelling behind me. I'm more kind of like the mechanics and systems, and that probably shows since I'm a software developer, but it does make a lot of sense because you did like the storytelling like categories in speech, right?
Well, I was in humorous, but yeah, I would and duo, but you would like tell a story basically. And so I really enjoy that part of it. So usually in the games, I like in RPGs, I do like the story aspect. Sometimes more than the combat aspect. I think that, the relationships, the conversations, all of those things are really fun and interesting to me.
And we did have our friend Zach ran a game of D&D for us for about a year.
So that was really exciting. It was the first time that we actually played together. Usually it's either Brock is either the DM or I am. So we don't really get to be on the same side too frequently.
Yeah, and actually, now that I think back to it, you often were the one in our group that was kind of taking the lead or making the decisions. A lot of times, my sister and I would either bicker or not have an idea.
If you're wondering who wears the pants, just kidding. Yeah, it's really fun to see the differences when playing RPGs. Like how your character differs from you in real life. And I would say that I'm more of a easygoing, like kind of follow along, whatever, kind of a person in my day-to-day life, but usually when we're playing, I'm more of a, I don't know, leader, I guess.
Decisive, I think, is the word.
I do decisive. Yes, I do like to take control sometimes.
Ashley's like, all right, we're done bickering about what we're doing. We're doing this. You guys can't figure it out, so I've decided for us.
Yeah, they'll be like discussing and I'm like I run forward and I like just initiate combat, or I'm like start having a conversation with the random person that we weren't sure if we were going to avoid or not. Like,
But it's not usually like, I want to use the word malicious, but I don't think that's the right word. But not like just running into combat like, and then
yeah.
causing problems. It's a lot of times it was more so like, I think we should do it this way. I think we should do it that way. And then Ashley's like, okay, we're doing it that way. And then
Yeah.
just run with it.
And I do prefer to play like a rogue usually of some sort. So I do like to be stealthy, but a lot of the characters that I played are kind of they're part of the group, but also kind of out to do things for their own gain at the same time. So I feel like at times I would like just continue and move forward, but it would be like stealthy, so it's not like I'd like, you know, bulldoze over people or anything.
Yeah,
but...
it wasn't like barbarian. I rage and run in and just run in the middle and start fighting everybody.
I mean, now that I think about it, though, maybe I should be a barbarian next.
That is a pretty classic trope of Hulk smash, run in and break stuff. So we've talked about being a player a little bit, but typically I interview dungeon masters, so maybe tell us a little bit about the games that you've run.
Let's see. I've ran most of the time it ends up just being like a one shot, partially because of the amount of time that we have, or we're playing with new players, or you don't know exactly what we're gonna do. But I like to keep things more loose when I'm a DM, so usually I have like a kind of a basic storyline ish, or like where things are taking place, kind of. But more in the prepping, I like to make lists of people, like different characters that could be around, different places that they could visit if they want to, and just kind of a list of random things that could be found, and then kind of go off of the questions that I ask or things that the players say, I guess.
And I think, just for people's reference, I think when you were running the game, we were doing Dungeon World, I believe. I don't think we were running full D&D. I think we were running Dungeon World.
Right. I think I did do...
You might have done a one-shot.
Yeah,
D&D.
I did one D&D one-shot, but then the rest was Dungeon World, yes.
Yeah. Dungeon World is a little bit easier, I feel like, to run than D&D. There's less to keep track of.
Right. I am less of a book reader when it comes to like getting all of the information. So I feel like I wasn't as good at running D&D just because of the immense amount of content that there is, that I just didn't, do the... Not that you had to do research entirely, but like I didn't really dive into the books very much to be able to utilize
involved,
it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I will say that I guess I would be like the rules lawyer of the group. I know
his nickname is RP Jesus. So when it comes to the games that we play, he will usually... I don't even know how really... but he just knows and will read like all of the like he'll just consume all of the game like content as much as he can. So if you don't know how something works and you kind of casually mention like I guess I don't know, I'll have to look that up, he will just like spill knowledge out. Like
I'm weird because I think reading rule books is fun. So
it does. It's very helpful because I don't like to do that. So balances out in that way.
that is, now that we mention that, that is my way of nudging people when I know that they're doing something wrong. This happens more in board games, I think, than in RPGs. But usually what happens is somebody will play something and be like, that's not a legal move, right? And then, so I'll ask them, how are you doing that?
More as a like prying, waiting for them to explain themselves to explain why they're wrong. At this point in our relationship, since I have known him long enough, if he says, so how are you going to do that? I generally will follow up by saying, okay, what am I doing wrong?
It's more subtle for people who aren't used to me saying that to them.
Yeah.
I will say for me, though, despite really taking in a lot of rule books and stuff, I do still find D&D to be somewhat challenging to run, and maybe it's because I haven't run it recently. But when you step away from being a player and into Dungeon Master mode, there's just so many more things that your brain has to keep track of, and so that level of difficulty jumps, even though I can recite a lot of the the rule books.
Well, and
rules.
I think it really depends too on who your players are, right? Because you can know so much information, but if the players either don't have that same level of knowledge or aren't willing to learn it's really hard to run. So I think kind of picking what route you go kind of depends on the DM and
the group that you're running it for.
Right.
And oftentimes what feeling you want to have too, right? Because some games do horror really well or do heists really well that other systems don't do. So if you're going for a certain feel, using the right system is going to be really beneficial as well.
Right. And like I said, I have that speech background, that storytelling background. So I really like that aspect within Dungeon World.
I remember for one of the sessions that you wrote out like a 1 or 2 page like scene to read to us when we got back to town after we had done our little quest or whatever it was. And that was really a really strong
that was the
scene to kind of end on.
The castle, right?
Yes, I believe so.
And there was
an assassination.
Yeah, so there was an assassination that happened in a big crowd of people, and it was kind of, there were a bunch of different little hints of things that they could kind of go off of for the next session. There was, you could see some people that were possibly involved or talking in the background, and there was some sketchy behavior going on with some of the guards, and how did they get assassinated in a crowd of people but you didn't see who did it. And
so if I remember right, it was kind of a party setting, like out or like festival type thing out in kind of like a town square or something.
Right.
And then there was like the king or the duke or whoever had like a balcony that he was gonna stand on and like give a speech. That's where he got assassinated.
Yeah.
But if I remember correctly, there was also something weird with like like colors and stuff seemed faded when we returned to town or something, right?
Right. So when they came back, like the people, so the main what did I call, like the main village or whatever, basically, the people were always so like bright and lively, and there was a lot of like emerald greens and like sapphires, bright reds. Like everything was really just bright and lively. And when they returned, everything seemed kind of dull. In the colors, like there were more like grays, and people's smiles had faded, and so there was something creeping in that they kind of needed to learn a little bit more about.
So there's a little tidbit if you need a jumping off point for a new campaign, you can kind of steal that little bit. So actually, now that I'm thinking about it, I think I'm maybe better at handling some mechanical stuff. Maybe we should co-DM and you can write the storylines, and then I'll just run the sessions.
There we go. Yeah. Yeah, we haven't had another session since then.
Mm-mm.
So
Well, it's been hard because
between COVID and,
my sister and her boyfriend are in college, so schedules are just a nightmare at this point.
Right. And so it just gets kind of difficult with timing and everything, but that was a really fun one. We should jump back in there.
Pick that one back up.
Yeah.
If you could, so if we did pick this back up, what system do you think you would want to do that in? Would you want to run it in Dungeon World again, or would you want to take a crack at running it in D&D?
I really enjoy Dungeon World, and the way that I don't know, I just really like the mechanics and how it works, I guess. So I would like to stay with Dungeon World.
I think
kind of because it was also wrote in, or like started in Dungeon World, and kind of, I don't know, how's that feel, I guess?
I think the only complaint that I remember you mentioning about Dungeon World was not getting to roll d20s.
Oh my gosh. Seriously, my biggest complaint. I love rolling dice, specifically d20s. But I'll survive.
I'll have to write a conversion so that you can run Dungeon World but use d20s instead of d6s.
That's okay. I mean, we do have a lot more d6s readily available.
We do. They, every board game has them, it seems like.
Right.
All the classics anyways. Yahtzee, Monopoly. You can always find packs of them just like at the store checkouts and stuff too for like $1.
Fun fact about Brock, if he sees a pack of dice like at the grocery store, it's like you have to convince him not to buy them. Like, we have enough dice.
It's only $1.
But these ones are blue.
They don't even have to be special RPG dice either, just regular colored D6s.
You don't realize how many actual like games or things you can do with just individual dice, though. I mean, we've like in the like RPG like world, or I don't know, do you remember that we played, like, we kind of made up our own like RPG game just like off of cards?
We did.
Just like we wanted to play, but it's only the two of us, and like, are we gonna do a whole campaign? Like, one of us writes the campaign for the other one. Like, that's kind of a lot. And, like, you don't know how much time you're going to be able to dedicate to it. So we just kind of went off of cards and, like, decided to, like, when we would draw a card, you decipher, like, maybe if it's a person and you happen to draw, like, a king or whatever. Okay, so it's, like, a male, royalty, whatever. And then went off of like conversations and jump off points and use different cards. So, yeah, we kind of.
Yeah, so we did. So, like, in that example, we used, like, the face value of the card to determine, like, how what's the word I'm looking for? Like, the magnitude of something. So, like you said,
Right.
if you were, okay, somebody is lurking in the shadows and, you get closer and you see who it is. Okay, draw a card. And then, like, if it's, like, a 1 or a 2, it might be like a peasant or a commoner or something. But like you said, if you drew like a king or a jack or something, then it would be like royalty or,
Right. You're
kind of
like
determine the magnitude of things.
8, 9, 10 is like a really strong person or something.
Right. And then we also used the we used the colors and kind of the suits as well. So like if we had, since we were kind of doing it cooperatively, there would be times where we would like have a question, be like, is the door locked? And neither of us could answer the question, so we'd say, okay, is it 50-50? Red is yes, it's locked. Black is no, it's not locked, right? And then we draw a card, and then whatever color it was, that would help us determine. Or you could do like, if it's more likely that it's locked, then maybe you pick one suit and you say if it's clubs, it's not locked, but all the other suits are locked, or vice versa. You could say, if you could flip that around to be not likely. So we could kind of set like intuitively in the conversation, how likely does this fact seem like it's going to be? And then we kind of almost set our own difficulty based on the card draw.
Right.
And then whatever the card draw, that's what would happen. Combat was kind of weird with that.
Yeah, it was. It ended up definitely being more of like a storytelling type thing, but we did kind of go with like, if you get like clubs, for instance, the enemy was stronger or, or could do more damage. If it was a heart, that had to do with their health and stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, but that was really fun to kind of use different like I guess RPGs, that style of game, but then kind of change it to what we wanted it to be for
Right.
playing just a two-person game.
Well, the nice thing about doing it with cards too versus dice is that we could like sit on the couch and somebody could just hold a deck of cards and draw. Or if we wanted to, we could have played it like in the car while we were driving,
Right.
Whereas dice, that's a little bit, it's not as portable. I mean, you can take dice anywhere, but you really have to have a nice surface to roll them on for them to really work. So,
And for those of you, if you have children, sometimes rolling dice on a table is a little too loud. And you don't want to,
that is true.
poke the beast and wake them.
Yeah.
It's another can of worms.
That is, well, and when we were playing, that is when Hazel was fairly little too, so
Right, few
waking
months
up was more of a big deal back then.
Right.
So from your perspective, you are not into a lot of the RPG stuff like online. Not like me, right? Like I just went off the deep end. I'm in everything. I'm on all the Reddit pages. I watch random TikToks about D&D, right?
I'm specifically on a couple of Reddit pages to be able to either just find cool stuff to send to you or to like slightly still be immersed.
But not too heavily.
Right.
What when you first ran a game for us, what was the what was the experience, and what was, I'm assuming it was more difficult than you expected it to be, or maybe what things weren't you expecting about running a game?
So I would say it went better than I expected, but it was different. than I expected. So when I first ran a game, I tried to plan out, I think, kind of like all first time DMs, you plan for this straight path, like, well, like, we need to go to this place. Like, literally, X marks the spot. Like, it seems pretty obvious. This is where we're going, right? And they're like, hey, there's this really cool thing over there. I'm like, what? Like, I was literally describing something in passing. Why are you going there? Um, so that first session was where I learned to very loosely plan things, because you realize that other people's minds just run so differently than yours. And so the things that would be more interesting to me obviously is not the same to you or to your sister, you know. So that was one thing that I noticed. Also, well, along the lines still of keeping things loose, I realized that when I assume that this enemy is going to be very easy to defeat, it may be very hard, or you may hit him with one blow. And like, I thought that that was going to be like a major event, and you're just like, okay, what should I do next? So I guess my first experience would be just, I don't know, I did not expect it to go the way that it did, but it definitely helped me be a better DM in the future, or after that, to remember to keep things just loose.
I think that both of those have come up on this podcast before, and I know online all the time. I see one of the biggest suggestions is don't plan things too in depth, because your players will just veer off the path that you have laid out for them. It's like almost guaranteed that they'll take something that you said, like you mentioned, yes, some little piece, and they're like, oh my gosh, that's cool. What is it?
I feel like specifically when there's like the opportunity to talk to someone, like sometimes you'll like just throw people or things in as you're describing, just so it's not like in open plain, it's like, oh, you see someone in the distance, or you see like you're walking through a town, there's a couple of buildings or whatever, and they're like, is there shops? And you're like, well, I suppose there would be. Is there a place, for instance, where I can get armor or whatever? Like, sure. Can I go kill something to like, yeah, okay, whatever. You just tell me what you want to do, because you seem to really have that in your head.
My sister is she really likes rangers, and she really likes to skin everything and then bring it to the local blacksmith and say, make me something with this.
Yes. Once you learn that, like, I feel like it helps to know your players, and like the things that they're interested in, because now I just know that, like, make sure whatever I kill, I know if it can be skinned. And
how can we use it?
Right, like how it can be used. And Brock will literally do the most like random things. You have to know that if he can jump off of something or onto something, he will, such as jumping off of an island or a mountain and just falling for several turns.
That it went better in my head. It really did.
Right.
Actually, so that was in our D&D game. I was playing a monk, and we were fighting this like phoenix thing, and it kept swooping down and attacking us, and as a monk I couldn't really do anything about it. And in that moment, I had forgotten that you can technically ready an action so that then, like, when it swooped down, I could have punched it. Um, Completely forgot about that. And then I was like, well, hey, I need to get it in, like, a confined space. So I run to the edge of this, like, big, tall hill that we're on and look down. And I was like, hey, is there, like, a cave or something down there? And DM's like, yeah, sure. So it's like, cool, I jump off because I'm a monk. I don't take any falling damage. Or I had a thing that didn't let me take falling damage. And then it's like, okay, you jump off. And and then, like, in that moment, I was like, okay, wait, no, I can ready actions. It's maybe I shouldn't do that. And then he's like, okay, so that's for 6 seconds of falling, you would have fallen like 200 and some feet. And I'm like, oh no, it's too late. I've already
Yeah.
committed. I'm like halfway down this hill.
Oh my gosh. Yeah. So that it's always interesting what you guys do. I do enjoy when I'm going to plan something and asking ahead of time just a few questions to figure out what people are more interested in at that time. Like, are you wanting to have more dialogue, less dialogue? Are you wanting more combat, or just kind of getting a baseline of what they are hoping this campaign will be, or like what type of person they want to be, and just asking some open-ended questions to kind of get that baseline.
For me, I think I tend to lean into, I really like combat, and I really like exploration / like environmental, like puzzles and stuff like that, or like how do we get into this building without being detected, right? Like, it's not necessarily combat or anything, but it's just like kind of problem solving. I don't like social stuff as much, but I think it's because I think one of the things that I struggle with, both as a player and as a DM, is just like knowing what my character would say or what the NPCs would say. So conversations, I feel like, are something that I need to work on.
Right.
What about you?
I usually enjoy the dialogue and kind of figuring things out, but I do feel the same way when it's like, well, if if you don't know exactly what your task is, it becomes really difficult. Like, well, I know I need to figure out what to do, or like, what would be a good thing to do, but I don't know who to ask or what to ask. So I think, I found that as a player, so then taking that into consideration as a DM, having at least some task at hand for them, and they can veer off if they want and do whatever they want, but at least have one or two things that they kind of clearly know that they can do.
There was always like a obvious next step, regardless of if we were ready to take it or not. Like,
Right.
well, we know that we have to go investigate this castle, but then, like, if we wanted to, we could be like, you know what, before we leave town, let's go chat with this merchant guy because he was doing suspicious stuff in the town beforehand.
Right.
But like we always had that thing that was like, okay, it's kind of like a quest marker, like in Skyrim. Like, if all of our side quests were gone, we go looking for more side quests, or we could just follow the main the main quest marker to the next thing. So back on that part where you mentioned that I always do just random stuff. In that game, I was playing a druid, and I would turn into a wolf during combat. And every single time we finished a combat, I would let out a celebratory howl.
Oh my gosh.
And every time you made more enemies show up.
Yes. Literally every time he would like let out a howl. So finally I was like, you hear something, above, like, or you feel a presence or whatever. Just letting him know that, like, you can do that all the time, but like you maybe want to quiet it down a little bit.
Yeah, I think it was like the third time I was like, okay, I gotta stop doing this because more people keep hearing me, and then they come and attack us because they're trying to figure out what's happening. So yeah, players, DMs use what your players do to your advantage, I guess.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, that was a good way to be able to play off of kind of the tells of the players. Like, well, I know that this is gonna happen, so after they finish, I'm gonna just allow that to kind of push the scene forward.
What advice do you have for new dungeon masters?
Don't get too uptight about it. Try not to be too dead set on what what you want to happen. Maybe have a start and a finish, but if you plan it out too much, either you're gonna have no idea what to do when they change, or you're gonna be disappointed that they didn't, go through this awesome thing that you had planned out for them. So yeah, just be loose and kind of plan. I found it really helpful to have a list of you know enemies that could be found in that area, like wherever you start, or like just a few, like a handful that could be there. Some different kind of pre-built people that you could use, and then kind of let the players walk you through it.
Do you have any advice for veteran dungeon masters?
Ooh, that's an interesting question. I wouldn't consider myself anywhere near a veteran dungeon master, so I guess I would say, gosh, that's a tough question.
We always hear the first one. That's a common question, right? For new people, what do you recommend? But for veterans, it's a little bit harder.
Yeah, it is. Um, well, I want to say be flexible to them too, but maybe in a different way. If you're a veteran, be flexible in the system that you're using. You know, um, After switching from D&D to Dungeon World, I feel like if or when we go back, I'd be able to take more information, or different mechanics, and apply that.
Mm-hmm.
So maybe being more flexible within, I don't know, the system that they're using.
Well, and that's one of the things that's one of the reasons why I enjoy reading um, lots of different rule books, even though I know I probably won't run a lot of the games, is because, like we mentioned, certain systems do things really well or have mechanics to handle things that other games don't, and a lot of them you can steal. Just you
Right.
can either straight up steal them, or you can kind of rework them a little bit so that they fit into whatever system you're running.
And I
Um,
I guess the other, maybe piece of advice or whatever, I think when you've been playing for quite a long time, it's not necessarily as new or as interesting. And when you, especially from a DM perspective, if you have been, the DM for a long time and you don't always get to play, I guess my advice would just be to remember to have fun with it. Not let the DMing and writing the stories become a chore, and try to still just find those really fun and funny and interesting things that players do.
those, yeah, avoid the burnout,
Right,
really. Yeah.
right,
Yeah, and I know that we've mentioned before that getting a chance to play in somebody else's game is a really good way to kind of get inspired again and then kind of recharge your batteries so that you're ready to come back
right.
roaring as a DM.
Because after a while, if it does become a chore more so, like you just lose that, fun kind of like nostalgic feeling you get when you get to play again. And yeah.
It's new and exciting, and you're not in charge of everything,
Right.
and you don't know what's supposed to happen. I was going to say, you don't know that everything that's going to happen already, but like we said, your
Right.
players are going to change it anyways, so you might not know what's going to happen for sure as a DM, but you have an idea of where the story is going. So
Right. And I do really enjoy, like, if you're doing a campaign, just doing like a random one shot that's either completely unrelated, or you can piece it in as, lore or something. Just something to change it up.
yeah, I think that was my first D&D game that I ran, was a one shot for our D&D characters. I asked our DM if I could just run one of the sessions, basically just a random side quest, basically, and then using all of our regular characters and everything, and then we popped back into our regularly scheduled campaign. So that's also a good way to give people a taste of being a DM as well, if they maybe have some interest in it, but they're not ready to take on a full campaign for a group, because campaigns can take a long time. They can be a lot of prep to get a story down, and
I think allowing like that, like our DM allowing you to DM the one shot also can give a really great perspective on like how someone else runs it. I feel like they kind of show you then where their interests lie.
Right.
And you can see like, oh, they focus a lot more on this or whatever, and you can kind of take that into account into, the continuation of that campaign.
Right. Just make sure you don't let them be like, oh look, here's like 1,000,000 gold in this chest that we just found.
Yeah.
It's
maybe set some restraints, like please don't kill the characters and don't give them more than
that.
this.
Okay, so that's actually a good question. Because some people are okay with their characters dying or killing their players. How do you feel about? You could answer this from either the DM perspective or the player perspective. Like, how do you feel about players having their characters die?
So that is kind of an interesting question. For me, with my first character, it was like, oh my gosh, no, she can't die. She's incredible. Now I actually enjoy creating characters, so whatever. I'm gonna go all in, and if I die, I'm gonna create another character, and they're gonna be just as awesome as the previous one. As a DM, I think it's kind of difficult because you don't want to have your characters or have your players think that their characters are invincible and like you don't kill them. If you leave them on the brink of death and then they all of a sudden come back to, something happens and they come back, you lose that like adrenaline rush. If
they're like, oh crap, I'm gonna die.
Yeah, like if you don't allow them to die, you kind of lose some of that, but also you do have to gauge your players, and if you know that someone's going to be so upset and heartbroken and they're not going to want to continue the campaign, like, then you obviously don't want to kill them, which is great having you as one of the players as a DM, because when all else fails, kill Brock. Because he's already probably got 7 new characters that he wants to try out.
Character sheets are already made.
Yeah, like he already has like their backstory ready for you. It's perfect. So then you can give the other players a taste of that fear of dying without actually killing them off.
So if I end up playing in more games on the server, which hopefully I will, you guys are free to kill my player or my character if you want.
Kill
So
my player.
go ahead.
I
Just
would
kill Brock.
hope that you wouldn't, but yeah, his character.
If it makes sense in the
annihilate it.
story.
He will love it.
Yeah, I always have way too many backup characters. I think it's a curse of being a DM is that you're already making monsters and NPCs and stuff all the time, right? So then you're always thinking like, oh well, this would be fun, and I haven't tried this before, and it can be kind of, I don't want to say frustrating, but like if you get bored with what you're playing in a current game, then it can kind of be like, I don't really want to do the same thing again for another 4 hours or whatever your sessions are, right? And you're like, I want to switch things up. So
Yeah, I think that as a DM, if you do allow your players to kind of change up their characters if they're getting really bored, I think it's really good to gauge them, because the whole point is to have fun and for it to be enjoyable for the players and for the DM, overall. So if you're feeling stuck or you're not enjoying it, change it. You don't need to be so strict with it.
and even if it's not killing the character, they can always go off and do their own thing, and then a new character can be introduced to the party for whatever story reasons that it would make sense.
Right.
Which actually I ended up doing that with my monk character from D&D. I switched to a warlock partway through, and then basically just had the monk stay at one of the temples that we were at to just train with the people there, and then picked up my warlock stray kind of on their way to another destination. So worked it in pretty well. Could even eventually swap back to that monk character at some point had that made sense in the story. So
Or if someone else died.
or somebody else died. And just like magic, there's my monk character.
Wow.
Just shows back up.
In true monk fashion,
Right.
just showing up right when...
Come running.
Yeah.
When you're running games, and I don't remember what we did for the ones that you ran. Did we ever use maps at all? I think you drew some stuff, didn't you?
Yes. I like having some things mapped out, more so to just kind of allow the people to have an idea of certain places, but I also like to leave it pretty open-ended too.
Yeah, you're more of like a whiteboard drawing type person, right? Where you've got like the vague layout of the thing, but it's not like super filled in with details, right? So you can kind of describe the little
Right. It's
bits
not
and
super
pieces.
concrete or anything. Yeah.
You can kind of make stuff up as you need it. Are there any specific tools, websites, or books that you like to use for games or get inspiration from?
I like to get most of my inspiration from... I like to kind of go off of the players to an extent. If I kind of know what their characters are, or what just kind of what they're interested in, then I like to jump off of that and then look through Reddit, or just more like lists, I guess, of things that could be in certain areas, I guess.
And then like your set piece, you always come up with like a set piece like scene to read us that's always really vivid.
Right.
And then
I like to have something pretty, like a scene or a place or something really drawn out and mapped out. And then from there, I like to let let the players kind of decide. So, for instance, like the contest that you ran with having a location, and you kind of really described how water was like a really valuable resource or things like that. Whatever. Kind of, I like to basically describe something like that and then go off of that and see like how they react to that. And then usually the first session, I feel like you're usually like they're kind of getting their bearings and just kind of figuring out how the dynamics of everything work, and they'll go off and do something, and then from there, really after the first session is when I really like to kind of build out.
Then you can start kind of connecting the dots and seeing, okay, they're interested in maybe doing some social stuff with some of these like elite council members, or, you know, getting dirt on them, or, you know, doing criminal work or something. Yeah, and then you can kind of flesh out more of a storyline based
So I
on
guess
those pieces.
a lot of my planning ends up happening after that first session, where every single time you end up obviously planning for the next time, but I feel like the direction that they end up going, whether it's combat or more like conversation, or what sparks their interest, kind of tells me where to go from there.
If you could have any RPG book created, what would you put in it?
Oh my gosh, that
is probably my hardest question.
That's a hard question, especially I really haven't done a lot of reading, but I feel like having a book that kind of compiles some of those different elements, whether it be like some pre-built like NPCs basically, or like there are lists. I think it's in, oh my gosh, why can I not come up with it? Gloomhaven.
Yeah.
It's like that big box G game.
It's a very big box.
Yeah, it is huge. So something that they have in there after playing that game, I really enjoyed taking pieces from that. They have like a list of things that you can just get out of a treasure chest, right?
Well, they have like the market. Like when you go back to town, they've always got like a certain market, and there's certain tiers of stuff you can get. But
there's something where you get like, if you get number 1 or whatever. There's one game that we played that has a list of things that, like, you just get like chest number or whatever, and this is what's in it.
Oh, that is in Gloomhaven too. Yeah, there's like reward cards and stuff that'll be like, go get this card and add it to the marketplace, or you get this thing.
Yeah, so you either get it or you get access to it or whatever. But I really enjoyed that you could, like, you don't have to plan out what loot is available all the time. Like, just have a list of items that you might be able to get, or like amounts of coins or whatever. And I really enjoy having those things kind of pre-generated, and then like you roll a d20 or you roll whatever, and that'll kind of tell you what's in there. Especially in Dungeon World, if that's what you're playing, you don't get as many opportunities to roll those dice. So I do enjoy having some of those things like pre-generated and wrote out. So that would be kind of a cool thing to have available. Just
book with options, basically. Random tables and...
Yeah, so the random book of options, I think we're going somewhere with that.
How do you engage players in the story? I
really like to ask them questions, specifically if someone is going on and they seem to be like they're the ones that are leading. I like to pick out another player and ask them questions about maybe how do you feel about, this place? What interests you here? What are you scared of running into? I really like to dig deeper into those characters or into those players, because sometimes if they're the like shy or quiet player, they've got a lot going on in their head. They just don't know how to interject those thoughts, or they don't feel like the opportunity is right and they allow someone else to lead. So I like to just try and ask them some questions, pry into them and see, because they end up, I mean, if you have the really outgoing players, I mean, they're going to be interested and outgoing in really anything you do. So getting those other ones to spark their interest, I think that's a really fun thing to do.
When I think asking definitive questions is helpful there too, like you said, like how does your character feel about this thing, or how, like asking them a question where they have to give you an answer, because you could say something to the effect of like, does your character have anything to say?
Nope.
And then yeah, exactly, then they're just like, yeah, no, I'm good.
No,
I'm
yeah.
good. But when you ask a question that's targeted, then they're most likely not going to say, I'm not going to answer that. They're going to sit and think about it for a second and then try to piece together an answer for you, even if they maybe aren't comfortable talking. But the question thing just kind of pulls them out a little bit, I feel like.
Right. I really enjoy to hearing what they end up having to say, because a lot of times it's not what you expect, and they have really good gems that you can kind of throw into the planning.
And if the character or the player more so is shy or just quiet, and you have like a loud, like outgoing person, like you said, that's playing, sometimes it can be hard for them to, like you said, interject, or like this other person is going on and on and on and on and on. But then as the DM, you can kind of be like, okay, that's great, shy player, what do you think, or what do you can kind of like redirect the attention in a way that maybe they don't feel bad like trying to interrupt that other player.
Right. I feel like the first game that I played, I was the shy player, and you were the outgoing player. Mostly, partially because of your knowledge, and I felt just, not knowledgeable in RPGs in general. And so I kind of just let things happen. And then as the DM would ask me questions and make me think about it, I enjoyed it a lot more after I was kind of like, I guess, pulled out of my shell and realizing that, like, you don't have to be the most knowledgeable player about the system or anything. Like, that's the beauty of RPGs, is you do get to kind of make it up, and it, like, at the beginning it was like, well, I don't know how I should feel, or like, I don't know what I should be interested in. And it was like, well, you get to create your character, you get to create what you want to do. So I guess I have a special place in my heart for those players, because as I went on, it kind of like, I don't know, it fueled my love for the game more.
And I think one of the questions that maybe you were asked was like, what are you afraid of, or like what creatures do you think would be here? And as somebody who's not like super familiar with a bunch of like fantasy type creatures, sometimes that could be a little bit more difficult, right? If you're just like, I honestly don't know what would be.
Right.
here, right? And I think in that situation, so if you're a player in that situation, even to just say like, well, is there some kind of monster, and give like a vague description of something, like maybe like a reptile thing that, hunts in these forests or something, right? And then somebody will, most likely one of the players will probably be like, oh my gosh, that sounds like one of these. And then
Right. I also do need to say, actually, as a person who is deathly afraid of spiders, when I say I am afraid of a spider showing up, I mean, like, likely I'm done. Like, I can't, no. So, that is a question that I do like to ask players. Like, is there something that, like, you really, like, not that you're scared of running into, like, in real life, you just do not want that incorporated into the game? Like, I enjoy games that include no type of spider creature whatsoever.
spiders are replaced with another type of creature.
Right. Like, I like if I'm playing actual like video games, it'll be like, is there an arachnophobe mod? Because that will
Right,
be
right.
how I know whether or not I'm going to play.
That's tough for you for movies too. Like some of those Harry Potter scenes, it's like
Oh
shut your
shoot,
eyes
I
and plug your ears and wait for me to nudge you.
literally the biggest Harry Potter fan. Have not and will not watch that scene.
there's like two
Yeah,
there's like two different times, or two different movies I think, that have like really big spider scenes in them, and
right.
they did pretty
So
decent with the CGI.
so
So
that was one thing though, like embarrassingly, like in the first campaign I played that was like, what are you afraid of? Or what do you think will be here? And I'm like, don't say spiders because you know spiders are gonna show up, but really should I let him know? Like, no spiders, please. I mean, so if you get that out in the open, like, please don't incorporate that. That'll just make everything go more smooth.
it is a really good point to just talk to your players to know what they are okay with and what they're not okay with. Especially like in your case, spiders are a pretty classic like forest type enemy. So and typically in D&D they're like giant spiders and not like regular spiders. So
Right,
it just uh
right.
lets you know to tone down some of those things, or to just replace them with something else equivalent
Bring
but
in
different.
really, really anything else, but not that. Not that, please.
Do you so when you're making your characters, like as a player or as a DM, do you like to come up with a big backstory for them, or do you kind of let that evolve as you play?
You said backstory for the characters.
Yep.
So, um, as a as a DM, I do really enjoy it when people do have a backstory, and but I do like to let them know like it doesn't need to be a like deep long thing. You know, it might be like I was wronged by my family, or I'm, seeking glory, or like what, maybe something that happened in their past that is fueling their future. Um, but it's fine if they don't. And I also encourage them to, like, as we're continuing through the campaign, if they kind of realize, like, if we're going through different places and they're like, oh, maybe I was from here or whatever, like, yeah, please go add that in. That's great. As a character, I think, or as a player, I think it depends on your DM. Like, for me, how easy or hard it is to make a backstory. Just knowing how planned out your DM has it ahead of time. And because if you're planning your characters before the before the actual session, if you're bringing your character in and the DM is bringing their story in, sometimes it's hard because you don't want to accidentally have competing stories or whatever.
Right,
So,
like things can clash or like they just don't make sense.
right. So that's why I find it to be important to have dialogue before the actual time of the session. Unless like the first time you're meeting, you're like making the characters together, and then the next time is when you're actual like when you actually play, then
Mm-hmm.
you know, then it doesn't matter as much. But if you're gonna like make your character beforehand, I think it's important to have that dialogue with the.
So my D&D character had a decent backstory that we worked out with the DM. Basically, my monk was a 4 elements monk, so he was traveling to the different elemental temples to learn, like, to train with them, basically. So it was kind of his. It was a little bit more in depth than that, but that was his kind of main backstory. But now I agree with what you were saying on having like almost like list items of kind of like vague things that are in your backstory. And I don't remember if it was on Reddit or where I saw this, but they explained it as um, giving the dungeon master knives for their characters. So they would write down like kind of bullet points, like looking for their lost sister, or like maybe it was, and had this one mentor that trained them how to do this certain thing or skill or something, right? So they'd have like list of people or locations or just kind of things in general that were important to their character, and those were kind of quote air quotes the knives that the DM would get to take, and then could use it to like stab the players or come up with stories, right? Because now
I love that with having like just jump off points for the DM, like they're searching for their lost sister, for an instance, like that could just show up anytime, or you could really intertwine that into the story, but also you don't have to. Like looking for the lost sister, like, well, maybe where you go at the beginning you don't find her, but you have that ability, and that doesn't that wouldn't clash with other people's backstory either. Like you're searching for your sister, that could be true, and someone else, was, you know, what was the other thing you said?
or like trained by some
Yeah.
mentor or something.
Yeah, the other person could have been trained by a mentor and you could run into them later too. Like it it wouldn't clash. That's the hard part. If you have too much stuff, like you were wronged by this whole group of people or this whole,
Right,
race or
you can
whatever,
almost
then like if one of the other players ends up being that, like that kind of pokes
you
holes in it.
you can kind of like create these like not blind spots, but like you can like lock off certain sections of content because my character doesn't like dwarves or something, right? And then like one of the players is a dwarf,
Right.
and that could be interesting tension. It may just be like really bad tension at the same time. And
That's why I like in Dungeon World you have those bonds,
yep.
and I feel like that's very like interesting to have these different bonds with different people that you can work on resolving or changing or developing throughout the campaign.
So for anybody who's not familiar with the Dungeon World bonds, they're basically each class has basically like 2 or 3 short sentences and that are fill in the blank, and then you put in another character's name. I think you're supposed to put in a player character name, but when we ran it, we said like if you want to make up an NPC and put their name in there, that's fine as well, right?
So they have different like good or bad bonds.
Mm-hmm.
Like this so and so wronged me, or I feel a strong connection with so and so, or we both worship the same God, or like just different.
And a lot of them are based on the class. So, like, the rogue has one that says, I stole something from blank. And I think it's the druid or the ranger has something like, blank doesn't understand nature, I will teach them, or
Right.
something, right? So it's they're kind of little prompts that are specific, or not specific, but kind of geared towards something that class would be interested in. Um, and then they can kind of cause some internal tension, not too much, or create those bonds and things, and players fill them out separately from each other, and then they're like during character creation, they all fill them out, and then you go around the table, and then you read your bonds. Like you describe your character, and read your bonds, and say, "I have here are my bonds with everybody at the table." And it's like, oh, that's interesting.
Right.
When you kind of see that network that was kind of randomly decided when during character creation without everybody's input.
Right. It's really fun to see that web being kind of woven together as you describe it. You're like, oh, okay. These two people are really close, and there's kind of tension between those two people, but I'm close with, one of them, and yeah, it just adds a really fun element.
Back a little bit on those knives, like we were talking, having those little bits and pieces, like I'm looking for my sister, and then the DM can kind of prod with a question and say, what happened to your sister? Do you even know what happened to your sister? Right? And you say, well, she was taken when she was 12 or something, right? And we don't know who took her, where she went, right? And then like later on, the DM could slip hints like, oh, there's this faction that we've been dealing with, like this thieves guild or something, and then have them come across the clue like, that's probably my sister, like they've got her, and you can tie it into, since there wasn't a super defined like where I'm trying to save my sister from the tower that's guarded by the dragon, since it's something just really open, I'm just trying to find my sister, the DM can weave it in somewhere to something that you're already dealing with in the story.
Right. And then that can also help you as the DM, if you can, help your players come up with those, you have a direction to propel them forward. Sometimes it's easy to stall if you don't, stall out somewhere if you don't have something to fuel them to move in a different direction.
Exactly. Always got to have that main quest marker.
Right. Exactly.
Well, Ashley, it was really fun having you on the podcast. I was not expecting you to want to do an interview, so it was really fun to sit down and chat for an hour.
I wish that I knew a little bit more about, more systems, but I think it's really fun to dive into just just how DMing works in general, like as a mindset almost.
Right.
And so, yeah, this is a lot of fun. Hopefully we can do it again and I'll have a little bit more background.
And maybe we'll have to get you in on a game on the server sometime.
Yeah, for sure. I don't know what it is, but like you can attest to this. My Discord literally never lets me in. Like, I don't know why. So, I will maybe have to try to attempt to get on.
You might just need to make a new account.
Yeah, it literally locks me out all the time. But then, yeah, I don't know. I don't know what's going on with it.
Every time we try to play games, like video games online with friends, it always locks up and doesn't let her in and doesn't respond to like password resets or anything.
Yeah.
It's really bad.
I don't know. Yeah, so we'll have to give that a shot.
Thanks for listening to this week's episode of the Dungeon Master's Toolkit podcast.
You can find links to all of the products and resources that we talked about on the show in the show notes. And if you'd like to join the community or find out how to be on the show, check out our subreddit or join us in our Discord server.